I'm Jen, Miss Jen Makes online, and I just thought I'd give a little bit of an update about what I've been making in the month of January. So at the end of December, I was trying to finish my matching family holly sweaters, and because I had to work on those and I didn't really feel like working on those, it really kind of killed my creativity. So I was kind of looking at some new and exciting cast-ons to do, but I was also looking at my whips. So at the end of December, I decided I really need to work hard on finishing some of the whips that had been on my needles for a long time so that I could get on with the new cast-ons that were actually getting me excited about knitting. So the first of those that I finished is this Birkin pullover, and I will hopefully insert some video of me wearing it so you can see. It is a negative ease 2x2 rib. I've had on the needles since March. It's knit on size US 2 needles, so it was pretty small, pretty long going because it's negative ease. You have to knit a lot of extra length. But I'm very happy to have it done. I've already worn it a bunch since I finished it. I knit this in Knit Picks Aristo, which is I think only available in their bare yarn. It is a lace weight merino cashmere silk blend. It was really lovely to work with, and I held it double to make fingering weight as the pattern calls for. And I think my gauge is like a little bit tighter, but it's really hard to tell with 2x2 rib how much was the designer stretching it when they measured their gauge, how much am I supposed to stretch it. So it is very, it looks more fitted in my shoulders than it does in the designer's pattern photos, but I think it still fits all right in the end. And some things about the pattern. There were a few errors that I found. I detailed everything on my Ravelry page, but it's a translation, an English translation, so I don't hold that against the designer too much. Some modifications that I made to it. I modified the collar pretty heavily. I converted it to working in the round instead of knitting double, just so it would go faster. I added a line of increases so that the points would come around further. I knitted it longer than it was called for in the pattern. And I experimented with putting a little bit of garter stitch on the back side of the collar. Now, if I were to do this again, I would do it a little bit higher and also a little bit wider. But that was just to experiment with really helping the collar fold over, which I find can be an issue in some hand knit collars like this. So I am really happy with how it turned out. The other modification that I made was to add some bust darts, just to add more length to the front. I do find in negative ease garments it tends to ride up in the front a little bit just because it's stretched more across the front, so I added some darts. They came out a little bit higher than they really technically should be, but it still adds the length that I need, so I'm very happy with that. So I am done with this pattern now. Miles and miles and miles and miles of 2x2 ribbing, but I am very happy with the finished object. I have worn it a ton. The next item that I finished is this Lunan tee by the Crea Bea, and I started this at the end of September on a trip, and then I just didn't really work on it a ton. It's knit in Wandering Flock Cotton Lino, which is I think a cotton, it may be some linen if it's got lino in the name, but it's got alpaca and silk in it as well. In this really lovely purple color. It's a nice yarn. It's somewhere between a fingering and a sport weight, which I liked for this pattern because I have seen, especially with like the Tolsta tees, that the gauge was quite loose, more loose than I know I prefer for my garments to be. So I wanted to pick a larger fingering weight yarn so that I could meet gauge and still have a fabric that I preferred. And I do really like the fabric that I got in the end. The yarn it's a little bit firm. It's not as springy as I found some cotton alpaca blends to be. Like, let's see, Illimani Sabri is one that I've used a lot, and I find it very springy for being 85% cotton. So it's pretty firm yarn. I think it's 3 or 4 ply. And I found that the silk was not well blended. There would be like chunks of bundles of silk fibers. It seems like they cut about a 1-inch staple length, which makes sense because cotton tends to be in the like 1 1/4 to 1.5 length, but it wasn't really like well blended with everything else, so there would be these chunks that would feel quite harsh just because they were so bundled together, and I was picking them out a lot of the time. But I do have more of this yarn. I knew going in that I would use just a little bit of the third ball, so I wound up buying 2 other colors as well with the idea to do a multicolor project. I'm going to be doing a pattern that I've had on my list for a long time from Bergerie de France for a while, and again, this yarn being somewhere between a fingering and a sport weight is going to be perfect for that pattern because of the gauge and the yarn they called for. I just remember last time I looked at it, it was really weird gauge wise for a finger, like a big gauge for a fingering weight yarn, so I'm very excited to use this for that. Some modifications that I made to the pattern. I did not add 1x1 ribbing on the hems. I find that 3x1 doesn't curl all that much for me, so I wanted a smoother look to just end in a 3x1. I used the Hiya Grandma's bind off, which I learned when I was making the Umbria tee last year. It's a really lovely bind off. It's very, very flat, and it ends quite sharply, which is neat. And so for the 3x1, I did the Hiya bind off like it was a 1x1, so that my middle knit stitch I treated like a purl, and I think it looks very clean for ending for a 3x1. So I was happy with that. I have not worn this yet. You might see it in the footage that I put up of me wearing it, but I was going to wear it this past week to work, and then I had my annual physical and they just busted my vein, and so I didn't want to have a giant bruise on my arm when I had a public facing event at work, so I did not wear this, but I am looking forward to wearing it soon. We've got some warmer weather coming up. I do think the fit, you might see it in the video, is a little weird. I just don't think that I'm a super big fan of drop shoulders. It gives me some weird folds up here, and so not the hugest fan of the fit, but I'm glad it's done. It's very cute. I'm happy with the fabric that I got especially, and I am a fabric forward person. Now, once I focused on getting those off the needles, I did give myself permission to cast some new things on. The first thing I did cast on before I finished them was just a pair of socks, because I figured socks are not the worst thing in the world to cast on. I actually cast these on Christmas Eve, and I was intending to do a just vanilla pair of socks with an afterthought heel. And this yarn is from Through the Wardrobe Yarn Company, and I picked 2 different colors which just don't match as great in person as I thought they looked online. I just think the color tone is a little off. One pink is much warmer, one pink is much cooler. This one is Pirouette, which was her collaboration with La Mercerie last year for their like sock of the month. So I didn't love it when I was knitting it in vanilla, and I got all the way past my afterthought heel, was like halfway through the foot, and just decided I wasn't happy with it, and I ripped it all back, and I decided to cast on these ribbit socks by Celine Knits instead, because I thought the texture would help a little bit with the color difference, and it also uses the same yarn for the heel. So this is, she calls it a kite heel, and it's a very interesting construction. It has really beautiful increases and decreases in this broken rib pattern. So I'm excited to finish these socks, although I have not been prioritizing working on them. One thing I will say, I'm not a fan of the broken rib in socks. It's not letting me just turn my brain off and zoom through them. I'm having to like redo how I'm working every time. So I would knit this pattern again. I'm not even finished with it yet, and I know I would, but I would do it as a regular 2x2 rib, because I think 2x2 rib will just go so much faster for me versus the broken rib. The next thing that I did was do some swatching, and I swatched for something that's been on my project list for a long time, which is the Jenny Jacket by Petite Knit. I already had some of this yarn because I'm using Bouche's La Petite Lamb's wool in the shade Candy, which is a beautiful fiber dyed, little like rainbow, subtle rainbow gray. And I got 3 balls of it from my best friend Rebecca after she used it to knit her Barbaro blouse. And she gave them to me in exchange for me knitting the sleeves for the blouse for her. So I knew I wanted to use that, so I did some swatching first. The Jenny Jacket holds 3 balls of yarn together. It holds 2 fingering weight and 1 like lace weight mohair, but there is also the Jenny Sweater, which holds just 1 strand of fingering with one strand of lace weight, and they actually had the same gauge. So I figured if I liked one fabric more than the other, I could swap them out because they had a similar gauge. So I swatched both with 3 strands and 2 strands held together, and it was a really informative swatch. One thing that I noticed right away is there's only 2 strands, the pattern's a lot more subtler than with 3 strands because in that case the fuzzy yarn is kind of blending more. I'm using Fiber Spade's Cumulus for my fuzzy yarn, which is a Surrey alpaca blend. But I really noticed the differences in the firmness of the fabric. You can see the 3 strand side, it really doesn't have a ton of drape, whereas the 2 strand side has a lot more drape. And the fabric from the 2 strand side is lovely. I was actually getting a tighter gauge with just 2 strands because when you're working these smocking stitches, you can pull it in so much more because there's less yarn there. But I really was looking for my wardrobe something of a more structured jacket, so I decided to go with 3 strands. I ordered the rest of the yarn that I needed, and I got started with the sleeves first, which is normally something I would do if I can because it avoids me being on Sleeve Island, but also knowing that there's like miles of this cardigan to work, I'm kind of like, oh, I might lose, maybe I should have waited on the sleeves because they're smaller and easier to get through, but I'm almost to the point where it says to stop in the pattern. Now, one thing I'll say about this pattern, there's not a schematic. She does give a measurement for the total length, which I'm guessing is from like your upper back point, but I don't know how long the sleeves are supposed to be. I do find that I have long arms, so I am not quite sure yet how much I'm supposed to add to these sleeves, and since it's not top down, I can't try it on. So what I'm planning on doing is going through the body of the pattern, calculating based on my row gauge where the sleeve split is actually supposed to hit from probably this back point, if that's where I'm assuming she's measuring from. And then I'll be able to make the decision on how long my sleeves need to be, but I'm close to the point where she says in the pattern. I think that's a good stopping point, and then I'll go through and do the math and figure that out. A modification that I made to this pattern, I make a lot of modifications to my patterns. I didn't like the 1x1 rib in the bottom going into the 2x2 rib. It just bothered me. Now she does have you increase from the rib to the pattern because the pattern pulls in a lot because of the smocking. So what I wound up doing is casting on a 2x1 rib. And so I was still, and it was a very similar number of stitches to what she called for in the 1x1. And then I was able to increase in the purl sections to be a 2x2 rib and give it a really clean look. I'm very happy with. I cast on with a normal tubular cast on, and then I did something that you'll actually see commonly on machine knit garments, which is after I did that cast on for 1x1, I purled together 2 stitches so that I turned it into a 2x1. So it's flaring a little bit right now, but I do think that I'm going to be able to smooth it out when I block it, and you really don't see it when I'm wearing it either because of how it stretches over my hands. I would like these sleeves to hit a little bit further down on my hand, so that's another thing I'm considering when I'm figuring out my length. This one is hard on the hands, and the smocking rows take a long time, so I do think this is going to take me a while, but I'm very happy with the fabric that I'm getting, and like I said, almost done with the sleeves, so on to the body next. I think that will take a while. Another swatch that I did is for the Minto Tee. And this, I just really fell in love with the cable pattern. It's like a little braid pattern. And I had in my head that I wanted a cable knit sweater, all over cable knit sweater, but pretty lightweight. And I was pretty sure that I wanted to use Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino, which is also the top that I'm wearing right now. I really like it as a yarn. So I had some other colors of it, and I decided to swatch it. I swatched it with the needle that the pattern calls for, and also one needle size smaller because I found out that I just liked that better. Cotton Merino doesn't bloom quite as much as, like, I think she used a cashmere in her original pattern, so that makes sense that I liked it a little bit firmer. My gauge is much tighter than hers though, even when I stretch it out a ton, and of course the fabric has relaxed a lot back after having my swatch out and just handling it for a while. So I'm going to have to do some gauge math wonkiness in order to get what I want. The thing that I'll say about this pattern is it already is using 2 gauges to make the sizes, so it calls for 2 different gauges, and then like size 1 is the tighter gauge, and size 2 is the same count as size 1 but a larger gauge, and then same with 3 and 4 and like 5 and 6. So there's a very limited actual number of stitch counts written in the pattern instruction that I can work from. So based on my math and wanting, knowing I want something a little bit more fitted, I think it's going to work out, and I can pull the right size out of it, but there will definitely be a lot of try-ons and figuring things out in the meantime. I'm also planning on knitting this long sleeve when it is short sleeve. The short sleeves look quite large to me, so I'll probably be pulling them in a lot more. I'm not worried about it. It's just going to be, it's not going to be the pattern as written what I wind up knitting. So the thought process for this was I wanted either a classic, well, I wanted a classic inspired cable sweater. So I wanted to do a cable sweater, but I wanted to do this super pretty cable pattern, and I wanted it to either be like a classic white or a classic indigo. And I really wanted a true indigo that would fade with time. So if you're not aware, a lot of original Gansey sweaters were dyed with indigo, which meant that over time they faded. I work parallel to the apparel industry, and I do a lot of things with denim. So when I'm at these denim shows, a lot of wash houses are also showing wash downs they do on cable sweaters. It's a very popular technique in the industry for people to get that same kind of wash down that you get on denim to make it look worn in on a sweater. And so because I'm someone who also has like a few pairs of raw denim jeans, I was like, ooh, what if I did a raw sweater where I want to start with an indigo sweater, and I want to make sure that it fades, and I want the fades to be reflective of me actually wearing it instead of something that was created in a wash house. So I got some undyed Knitting for Olive cotton merino, and the idea was I could do this in white, or I could find an indigo yarn. But a friend of mine who went to Japan last year for work, when she was there we were looking for an indigo dyeing workshop for her to take, but we didn't manage to find one. So she came to me and was like, what if we did some indigo dyeing ourselves? And I was like, perfect. I have been thinking about an indigo dyed sweater, so that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to dye this yarn indigo at home. I got some indigo powder from a place called Botanical Colors. They have a ton of information online about how to do it. I'm following their instructions for a 1-2-3 fructose indigo bath. So it's like 1 part indigo, 2 parts fructose, 3 parts calcium hydroxide, and or the fructose and calcium hydroxide might be swapped. But it's pretty easy looking to do, so we're going to do it. I need to skein these balls up. Unfortunately, they come in balls, and I need them in skeins. So I'm going to have to unwind all the balls into skeins so that I can dip them in the indigo, and I'm going to try to build up on the outside of the yarn as I can. I'm going to try to make that into a video as well because we're pretty excited about it. But yeah, so that is the plan for another project that I'm going to be working on that I've swatched. Now, when I look at those next 2 projects, and I am very excited about them both, they're also both kind of complicated projects. The Jenny jacket has every 6 rows. I'm having to do that smocking row, which is like really tough on the hands and slow to work. And the Minto tee, actually every other row is cabled because you jump between 2 cables, but you're doing a lot of cables. There's not a lot of plain knitting in this to just relax with. So I was also kind of thinking, oh, do I need to cast on a simple project as well? And I'm still waffling between it, but I have been really interested in the Artemisia sweater by Emma Meyer. It's very cute. I have a boucle cotton sweater from college that's just like a vintage cut, and I really love it, and I would really love, I think, this kind of like boucle sweatshirt look in a knit sweater as well. Now, I am a big fan of Through the Wardrobe Yarn Company, and she was having a sale around the holidays, and I picked up some of this, she called it Pastel Pop mohair. It's kind of a mix between her Dreaming of Candy Unicorns, or it's just like a little bit more of a tense version of her Dreaming of Candy Unicorns, so it's got all kinds of rainbow pops on it, and I thought this would be really cute held together with a just plain undyed boucle. Right now I'm thinking the Knit Picks Bubbly Boucle, which it appears to be a thinner yarn than the yarn called for in the Artemisia sweater, but I think holding it together with this mohair will get me to the gauge. Someone else is doing the same thing on their Ravelry project page, so I'm going to be following them closely to see about the gauge that they get, but they're holding together the Knit Picks Bubbly Boucle with a mohair in order to get gauge. So that is something that is on my project list. I don't know when I'm going to break down and order the Knit Picks Boucle in order to do it, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. Do I need something simple to just have some mindless knitting, or do I need to just really focus on these more complicated projects because I'm going to be really happy in the end with the garments that I get out of them and what they do for my wardrobe? So, undecided, we shall see. And one other thing that is unrelated to knitting, but I have taken in these jeans. So as I mentioned, I work parallel to the apparel industry. We have access to some laser denim sample machines at my work, and we made these for a sample. So these are men's jeans that we use for sample making a lot, but we lasered them with this cute bow pattern I came up with, and then I had to take them in at the back to fit me. So I just wanted to mention them because they are super cute and I'm very happy with them, and you'll see them when I'm trying on my other sweaters that I finished recently.